Hello, everybody. Catholic Dad signing in for episode number, I think they're 23. And public pensions are evil. That's what I was going to say today. I'm going to describe this to you, and don't get angry, particularly if you're in law enforcement or the fire department. So, when I was a little boy, like 11, 12 years old, I don't know what it was, I asked my dad one day, he was NYPD, and I said, "Hey, Dad, how does your pension work?" And so he said, "Oh, well, you take a part of your portion of your pay and you put it into this fund, or you give it back to the city, and then the city invests it for you, and then you get an expected rate of return on it, and then eventually, when you hit 20 years, you get 50% of your salary for the rest of your life, corrected for inflation, and then you also, for every extra year you work over 20 years, you get 1/60th of your pay." So if you work, 22 years, you'll get 2/60ths or 1/30th extra over 50% of your pay. And then all these alarm bells went off in my head because I was always a little bit of a thinker as a kid. Wait a minute, how do they know what the rate of return is going to be, where they can guarantee all these people's pensions way out in the future? And so I questioned my dad and I said, "Hey, Dad, how do you know what the rate of return is going to be? How do these people know the money's going to be there when you need it?" He's like, "There's a lot of smart people. A lot of smart people doing this stuff. They know." And then I was like, well, "Yeah, but do they really know? I mean, can you predict an earthquake? No. I mean, the financial world is exactly the same. Perhaps there's going to be some kind of financial cataclysm, and then these public pensions are going to go away. Now, why are they evil? Because if so, the public pensions are promises made by politicians, guaranteed by taxpayers. Think about that for a second. So what you do is you take all this money that's paid for by the private individual, the police officer himself, or the firefighter, or whatever else the public pension's in, and it goes into this big pool of money that's now being watched by a bunch of politicians. Do you think politicians are good at watching money? I don't think that's even in dispute these days. I think everybody knows the answer to that. No, they're bad at it. In fact, most politicians will give away as much money as they can to their own constituency or the strongest lobbyists or the most compelling reason. And therefore, these public pensions are not necessarily well funded because they take the money and they bring it elsewhere. Social Security has been raided numerous times. So, but here's the problem with it. What if the money's not there? Well, then who is legally obligated to pay the money? Well, it's the state, right? And how's the state going to get the money? Well, they have to go to the taxpayer, and therefore, what you do is you take private gains, right, and you reward people with private gains. But if it doesn't work out the way you thought it would work out, then the taxpayer is there to bail you out. It's the same way the financial crisis happened in 2008. What you do is you privatize gains, but you socialize losses. That's why it's so intrinsically evil. And so I actually made the argument when I was a little kid to my dad, and I remember this. I said, "Why don't you just take the same money that they put into these pooled pensions, and then you put in like some kind of separate retirement account for that person where they actually own the money?" And then my dad made the argument, "Well, nobody'd save money then." I say, "Well, if you could legally force them to save into a police pension where it was pooled, why can't you legally force people to pay into a pension where it's in an individual account?" And I don't think my dad got that when I was that age. He was kind of a little bit annoyed with my line of questioning. I remember that. But it still never made sense to me. And I was always concerned that there would be some kind of financial catastrophe, or politicians would promise too much, or the expected rate of return on investment would be too high, and therefore they would overproject things. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the financial world recently, but I think that's all coming to a head. A, throughout the world, but B, in terms of state pensions and city pensions within the United States. I think Connecticut's in a lot of trouble. Illinois certainly is in trouble, but there's a lot of public pensions that all we need is a mild drop in the stock market, and then suddenly they are in catastrophic trouble. And it's funny because I was thinking about the video this morning that I was going to talk about, and I walked by in our local newspaper that said that public pensions are okay even after last year's drop, and I guess it was calling me to talk about this topic. I think honestly, if I were king of the world or I was some kind of great legislator that could have my way, I would make a law that you cannot legally pool pension plans backed by obligations of taxpayers, because that automatically leads to cronyism and automatically leads to corruption. It takes the money away from the people that actually truly own it, those who paid into it, and puts it as a watchdog to the politicians. And politicians, we all know, it's the second oldest profession in the world. A little bit less honorable than the first oldest profession in the world. So we should not trust our politicians with pooled bank accounts. And here's the other thing, by the way. Pensions, once you die, you die. So if you're a police officer and you work to the ripe old age of like 48 or 50 or something like that, and then let's say you die when you're 52, that money completely goes away. Like from your family, you actually have no inheritance from the pension plan. And that's what they rely upon. And those who live until they're like 97 years old, they get a big overpay out of the pension plan. And so they rely upon people dying young and people dying old, and they try to level it out. Why not? And I think it would be an improved plan. Allow the police officer to put the money into his own bank account, and if he were to die young, or if he were to underconsume when he was 50 years old, or get another job after he retired from the PD, that he could actually pass that money on to his children or his grandchildren. I think that makes a lot more sense than keeping it into a big welfare system. Anyway, I guess that's all I had to say. Public pensions are evil, and the reason why is because they privatize gains and they socialize losses, and they also create a big fight within the population when the bill comes due. I mean, if the firefighters don't get their pension or police officers don't get their pension, I agree. You should be reasonably angry. You should be quite angry if you worked your whole life with the expectation of a pension, and then the politicians or the market or whatever else didn't deliver. But if you got your own private pension policy that is paid the same way as the public pensions, and then you had this little pool of money in your account that you could watch and take out, you would never be mad at anybody, and nobody would be beholden or on the hook for your private pension, which if you ask me, that's the way it should be. If I were king of the world, I would make that law by edict or dictate. I think if you want to force people to save in private pensions or in public pensions, you could also force them to save in private pensions by law. I mean, we do it in Social Security, even though that's a big welfare system anyway. But we could do it with a private pension plan. So therefore, that's Catholic Dad weighing in on more fiscal stories about public pensions, why they're evil. I think pooled pensions are also evil, but I can talk about that at a later date. Okay, Catholic Dad signing off. And by the way, get to Mass and pray the Rosary daily. Good night.